Hey, Raider Nation, thank you for joining us on this special collaboration between the Only Nation podcast and the Raider Roots podcast. Here's T3 with a special episode about Al Davis on his birthday.
July 4th, 2021. It's Independence Day. In fact, we are advancing on the 250th celebration of this great country. But we're also getting closer to the 100th birthday of a man who took the game of professional football and gave it certain characteristics. July 4th is the birthday of Al Davis, whose spirit is still alive and kicking within the heart of Raider Nation, even though he's been gone now for nearly a decade. This is T3, co-host of the Only Nation podcast and the creator of a new series called Raider Roots, which traces the entire history of the Oakland, Los Angeles, Las Vegas Raiders. But today, we are simply focusing on one man, Al Davis, and the part of the journey that brought him to professional football and immortality. From his breakout as a young assistant coach in the fledgling American Football League with the Chargers in 1960, to his first year as a head coach in Oakland, which witnessed a remarkable turnaround from a 1-13 team to a 10-4 winner in just one season in 1963. Davis once said that in order to enjoy true success in sports, you don't just win, you dominate. So let's go all the way back to the 1950s, to tiny Adelphi College, and see this budding genius of a young coach who wanted to just win. During the early years of his coaching career, Al Davis searched for sports meetings to attend. If football was on the agenda, he usually made every effort to be there. He was a man on the rise, looking for opportunities. Al Davis was a busy young man while at Adelphi. Not only was he the coach of the football team, but he also coached the baseball team. In fact, in 1952, his second year there, he claimed that his team would have won the national championship except for the fact that they dropped a critical mid-season game to Fordham University. But even as Al Davis's coaching career was taking off, a world conflict was brewing. The Korean War was in full swing. In the year 1953, young Mr. Davis, at the ripe age of 23, was inducted into the U.S. Army. He was first stationed at Fort Dix, New Jersey, and then relocated to Fort Drum in Upper New York State. By that time, Davis had already started seeing a young lady whom he met while attending college up at Syracuse. Her name was Carol Siegel, and she hailed from Brooklyn. She was a fashion and marketing major at NYU, and before that, actually a classmate of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg at James Madison High School. One thing that instantly appealed to Al Davis was Carol's love of sports. After just a few dates, however, they split up. He was still in upstate New York while she was in Brooklyn. After a time when Al had returned to the area to coach at Adelphi, he met her again at a club out in Long Island that was owned by his Uncle Charlie. Carol and Al started dating again just before Al was called into the service, and he took notice once again of how much she liked sports. Davis saw a sign over a lingerie shop that showed a woman running, and she had a black stocking in her hand. The name of the store was Caroli. From then on, that's what he called her, even though friends and family continued to call her Carol. Caroli corresponded with Davis and went to visit him on the weekends as he was stationed at Fort Dix. They would attend football games or go to shows together. One time when he was on a short furlough, he went to a football coaches convention on the Jersey Shore in Atlantic City in 1953. It was there that he met up with Captain Richard A. Lewis, the Special Services Officer at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, just outside the nation's capital. Captain Lewis informed the young private that he had been searching for a coach to run the base's service team. Lewis's commanding officer, Major General Stanley Scott, was eager to build a strong football program at Fort Belvoir to compete with other service teams. Because of previous magazine articles that Al had gotten published and his web of contact with other coaches around the country, Davis had already started to build a reputation among college football coaches and followers. Captain Lewis, as it turns out, had already been asking different coaches about young Mr. Davis. Lewis arranged for Davis to be transferred to Fort Belvoir and to take over as the new coach of the football team, the Fort Belvoir Engineers. He reported as Private, later Private First Class Allen Davis, the new 24-year-old head coach. Davis had a unique opportunity. In building a program from scratch, he was able to look around other Army camps and bring in former college football players who had just been inducted into the service. He arranged and conducted tryouts. He set up dormitories for the players with a coach's room at the end of the barracks building that came to be called the rest home. As he began to assemble a group of coaches to join his team, he selected a former All-American quarterback from tiny St. Norbert's College in Wisconsin, Dick Romanski, who was also an excellent resource on the skill of punting the football. This particular association between Davis and Romanski would continue for over 50 years and simply serves as one example of how people closely associated with Al Davis stuck with him for many, many years. Coach Davis put together a squad, but it was not simply a run-of-the-mill group of wannabe football players. His team featured Hank Lauricella, an All-American tailback from the University of Tennessee, and 2 tackles from the same team, a team that had already won a national collegiate championship. The captain of the team and its center was Second Lieutenant George Morris, an All-American from Georgia Tech, who would go on to play professionally for the San Francisco 49ers. Lauricella and Morris would both eventually be voted into the College Football Hall of Fame. One of Davis's quarterbacks, Ed Kissel, eventually became signal caller for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Starting out as Private First Class, Davis still refused to be a pushover. Instead of a standard issue GI cap, he wore a dress hat with a leather brim. He felt it was important to stand out and to assert his authority, especially over some of his players who actually outranked him. He would work them hard from the very beginning of training camp. During one particular practice session, George Morris complained that he had never had to knock himself out like this at Georgia Tech. There was even one instance in which a group of the soldier athletes threatened to strike and not play a game because Davis had continued to work them so hard. Davis just looked at them and said, "You have a choice. You can play or you can be shipped to Korea." They played. Davis arranged a practice scrimmage with the University of Maryland, which was situated close by. Their coach, Jim Tatum, had assembled a team that would go on to win the 1953 national championship and would remain an Eastern power for many years. However, the Fort Belvoir Engineers under Davis bested Tatum's Terrapins. The team from Fort Belvoir finished with a record of 8-2-1, with one of those losses coming in the last game of the season to the Quantico Marines, led by Al Darrow, who went on to become the original quarterback for the New York Titans of the American Football League. All this time, Davis had continued to date Caroli. She would make trips down to Fort Belvoir on the weekends to see him. During football season, she attended the games with Major General Scott and a young assistant coach for Paul Brown's Cleveland Browns, a man by the name of Weeb Eubank. Weeb was there to assess talent and serve as a scout for Brown. He and Davis would cross paths many times as rivals on the AFL coaching sidelines. After the service games, Davis would often warn Caroli that life with him would not be fun. He was dedicated to a coaching career and wanted to make it clear that football came first. He was so immersed in his work that he didn't give her a whole lot of time. Close friends even wondered why she continued to stick around. He was always anxious to get back and watch game films, which was so much more of a laborious task than it is today. He would say to her something that he repeated many times. In fact, he even repeated it to her years later, as she was lying in a hospital bed in a coma. He would say, "I'm going to do football. Do you want to come along? Are you sure you can handle it?" She said that yes, she wanted to do it. Their relationship was indeed serious, and they decided to get married. Her family cautioned her that marrying Davis might not be the best idea. At first, Davis admitted, they knew about my father's businesses and thought she would be okay. He invested in real estate, had the raincoat factories down south, and owned a company called the Little Duchess Undergarment Company, which was very well known at the time and connected to Fruit of the Loom. They figured I was going into the family business. Al's older brother Jerry was already involved in the family business, but Al's father didn't encourage the younger brother to join in. He said that he was always proud that Al had chosen to devote his life to his one true passion, football. And Al's mother also encouraged this. Caroli had been a very good athlete herself and was good at basketball. When it became apparent that the loving couple would make a go of it, Caroli's father asked Davis straight out if he would be going into the family business. Davis had clearly indicated that no, he was going to become a coach. When her father asked how much money a coach made, Davis replied, about $4,500 a year. After a big family wedding in New York in 1954, Davis had been working outside of the Army, having mustered out in the spring. And after having to appear at a congressional hearing on Capitol Hill, held by a House Armed Services Subcommittee, on the preferential treatment given to certain athletes serving in the armed forces. But now that he was a married man, he wanted more for himself and his young bride. So he decided to move them down to Charleston, South Carolina, leaving a part-time job as a scout with the Baltimore Colts to work at the Citadel, a military-oriented college located at the southeastern tip of South Carolina's charming city. The post-war commander was General Mark Clark, who had led the Allied campaign in Italy during World War II. General Clark had just recently hired a man by the name of Johnny Sauer to revive the football program at the Citadel. Sauer himself was also leaving pro football, coming eastward from his position as an assistant coach with the Los Angeles Rams. At the time, the publicity director for the Rams was another young man by the name of Pete Rozelle, who Davis had met a few times while visiting the Concourse Plaza Hotel in Brooklyn, where traveling pro football teams stayed. Al, always the gregarious extrovert, made it a point to be around places where football people congregated. It was Rozelle, in fact, who recommended Davis for Sauer's staff. In 1955, as Al Davis and his wife headed toward Charleston and the next stage of his football life, he had already crossed paths with Rozelle, someone he would later become embroiled with over a quarter of a century later, over free agency and trying to relocate his Raider team. For now, though, Davis was entrusted with helping to build a program similar to what he built in a very short period of time at Fort Belvoir. His responsibility was helping to build a solid offensive line and also to recruit at the Citadel. As a football coach amid the college ranks, he had to hit the trail and recruit players to start filling out the roster. This gave young Al Davis a chance to travel and rub elbows with lots of people around the country. Many football people that he already knew as a result of the different football camps and lectures he had attended. Davis had accumulated a file of over 3,000 high school prospects around the nation. His mind was a steel trap, and he collected information on would-be recruits. He made it his business to know their personal likes, as well as what they were good at on the field of play. He traveled up and down the eastern seaboard, seeking recruits for his team. All the travel was arranged and paid for by the Brigadier Club, a group made up of prominent Citadel graduates. Davis was a good, tough coach, but he could also be a smooth talker when the situation warranted. One time, in search of talent, he made a trip to Youngstown, Ohio, to make a pitch to recruit a young end from the area named Paul McGuire. When he first met with McGuire's parents, Al bestowed the virtues of a rigorous military environment that added to the challenges of a higher education. Paul's father liked the idea of their son attending the Citadel because he felt their son needed the discipline. When Davis then asked where Paul was at that very moment, he was told that Paul was at the church, and Al was given the directions to go and find him. The senior Mr. McGuire informed Davis that young Paul was serving as an altar boy. Davis then got all dressed up in a shirt and tie and made his way through the tough, blue-collar working-class town on a Friday night. As he walked past the town's main hotel, a man sitting out front curiously asked Al who he was looking for. When Davis told him he was going to the church to find Paul McGuire, the man told Al that wasn't where he could be found. He said that instead, Paul could be found at the nearby billiard hall, shooting pool. When Davis found the young Mr. McGuire and introduced himself and identified his purpose, Paul asked Davis right out what position he would be playing on the football team. Davis told him he would play end and that he was also going to punt because he knew that McGuire had been a great punter in high school. McGuire also wanted to know if he was going to have to wear a uniform. Davis told him, "Yes, you are." But he also told Paul that he would look good in uniform and that lots of young co-eds from the local girls' schools usually came around the campus, and that all he would need to do is parade around in his uniform, and he would pretty much have his pick of the litter. Then McGuire asked if he could also get a car, and Al said yes. McGuire said, "You got a deal," and he enrolled at the Citadel. After about a month on the campus, McGuire asked Davis about the car that he was told he could get, and Davis directed him to a particular used car lot and told him who to talk to, and said the man would have a car for him. McGuire went there, found a car that he liked, and when he came back from the dealer, he stormed into his coach's office and complained that they actually wanted him to pay for it. "I said you can get a car," Davis responded. "I didn't say how it would be paid for." McGuire went on to have a fine college football career and went on to an 11-year pro career in the AFL, followed by a long and successful career in sports TV as a football commentator and analyst. At the Citadel as a coach during games, Davis sat up in the press box calling plays, which were generally run by Sauer without any changes or audibles. The Citadel got off to a fast start in 1955, winning 5 of its first 6 games, but finished the season with a record of 5-4. The young coach received a lot of the credit for his role in the Citadel's early success, although he lost some favor with his head coach because of his bold talk and self-promotion. The 1956 season was less successful. The team finished 3-5-1. Sauer resigned at the end of the season. When Davis applied for the head coaching position but was rejected, he resigned as well. There were allegations of payments and other benefits to players that were in direct violation of NCAA rules. There were additional accusations that Davis had pressured professors to change grades to keep student athletes eligible to play football. Searching for greener pastures and using his football connections, Davis landed at the University of Southern California. He always said that as a young guy, he had a dream that someday he would build the finest organization in professional sports. And he had a lot of thoughts about how he would do it. He had the inspiration of 2 great organizations when he was growing up. The New York Yankees to him personified the size of the players, the power, the home run, intimidation, and fear. The Brooklyn Dodgers, on the other hand, under Branch Rickey, were totally different in his mind. They represented speed, the development of players within an organization, a way of playing the game, the Dodger way of playing the game, and he always thought that someone intelligent could take all the great qualities of both and put them together and use them. And even as he studied and followed both teams, it is somewhat ironic that one of those teams, the Dodgers, would follow Al to the West Coast, even though the 2 moves were unrelated. Al Davis transitioned to Southern California, where he served as an assistant coach. He was an effective recruiter and was a master at painting a picture for others to see. He brought one particular prospect, a young man by the name of Angelo Coya, to the Los Angeles Coliseum one night, and as the lights were slowly turned off, asked the student to imagine himself playing there before 100,000 people. Coya later played for USC and ended up years later working in the Raiders front office for Al. When Davis first arrived, USC was on NCAA probation for allowing alumni to secretly give money to players and had not been permitted to play in a bowl game at the end of the 1956 season. These sanctions didn't help Al, the recruiter, in his first 2 seasons at USC, 1957 and 1958, during which the team posted a combined 5-14-1 record. The head coach of the Trojans, Don Clark, started relying more and more on the young man with the sharp ideas and the mind that could recall players, player tendencies, and also specific plays. When 1959 rolled around, Clark and Davis were really hopeful that coming off of sanctions, the team would be able to hit its stride. It was the 3rd year of Clark's tenure, and USC had built up a powerful team that went 8-2 in 1959, and tied for the championship of the newly formed Athletic Association of Western Universities, now known as the Pac-12. The co-captains on that team were Ron Mix, a Jewish offensive tackle, and Willie Wood, a black quarterback from Washington, D.C. Davis remembered catching hell for recruiting both of them, and it would show early on that Davis was a man on the cutting edge of racial equality and cultural diversity, and he didn't care who was against him. Both Mix and Wood went on to distinguished college and pro careers, and both are now enshrined in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Ron Mix, in fact, would be presented at the Hall of Fame induction ceremony by none other than Al Davis himself. Davis's own learning experience at USC was on the fast track. In his second year, he became the offensive coordinator. The following season, John McKay from Oregon joined the staff, and he stayed at Davis's home until the rest of his family could get settled in Los Angeles. The two became friends, and they shared a passion for football. McKay was an expert on offense, so Davis was switched over to defensive coordinator. Now that Davis was in a position where he could comfortably operate on both sides of the ball, he felt that the coaching assignment represented a big leap in his own football education. But in 1959, the Trojans were hit with sanctions once again. This time, Davis was at the center. He was cited for illegally recruiting Angelo Coya and another player to transfer from the Citadel. The NCAA did not allow the Trojans to compete in the 1959 NCAA championships, and the team also received an additional year of being banned from television. The USC Faculty Committee on Athletics removed Davis and one other person from all recruitment activities. With everything seemingly falling apart, Don Clark left coaching altogether and went into private business. He was replaced as head coach by John McKay. McKay told his good friend and colleague, Al, that because of the stigma of the recruiting scandal, there would be no way that USC would be able to retain Davis on the coaching staff. This was the step that led him to turn his eye toward the pros. He was just coming back from a big downtown winter sports banquet as a guest of Paul Zimmer, the sports editor of the Los Angeles Times. Even though he was still listed as an assistant coach on the staff at USC, Al's time was pretty much done, and he was just looking for another opportunity. When he got home from the banquet, very late, his wife Caroli was waiting up for him. There was somebody that Al was supposed to call back, no matter how late it was. This phone call would end up changing Al Davis's trajectory and set his true football legacy in motion. Many things can be said of Al Davis. He's been called many names. He's been referred to as a maverick, a mastermind, an evil genius, and some less colorful monikers as well. But one thing that can be said of Al, he always had a plan in his mind, a strategy. So as we all celebrate the 4th of July and the birthday of a legend, let us remember the football genius who had a plan, hatched it, and went on to become one of the most legendary names in all of sport. Happy 92nd birthday, Al Davis. I want to thank NFL Films and Murray Olderman, the author of Just Win Baby, the Al Davis story, for much of the information that contributed to this presentation. Make sure to subscribe to both the Raider Roots podcast as well as to the Only Nation podcast, which can be found on all your favorite podcasting apps. This show was produced by Heidi Stabbert in association with the Only Nation podcast. This has been T3, and I want to thank you for joining me as we wish a happy birthday once more to the late, great Al Davis, born on the 4th of July. And as you enjoy the festivities and fireworks associated with the day, please remember the words of the immortal Al Davis. The fire that burns brightest is the will to win.